are stunning. Among other things, it says this: we assess with high confidence that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election, the consistent goals of which were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. Let's bring in our justice correspondent, Pamela Brown. Pamela, this report describes Russia's motivations actually shifting a bit over the course of the election campaign in 2016.
That's right. It says that when it became clear to Moscow that the election favored Hillary Clinton, that the Russians ramped up their efforts to undermine her campaign through the disclosure of those hacked emails and as well as the fake news campaign that apparently Russia was behind, according to the U.S. intelligence community. Here's what the report says. It says, when it became clear to Moscow the election favored Hillary Clinton, the report says, we further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. When it appeared to Moscow that Secretary Clinton was likely to win the election, the Russian influence campaign then focused on undermining her expected presidency. Wolf.
So there were multiple objectives, at least two objectives or three objectives. One objective to undermine the faith in the U.S. democratic process. A second, to undermine credibility of Hillary Clinton. And if she was going to be elected, make it more difficult for her if she were to become president. A third, though, they specifically state, was to try to help Donald Trump get elected.
That's right. And it seems like from reading the report and the view of the U.S. intelligence community, it had to do with more to do with Putin's grudge against the U.S. for what he perceived as efforts to undermine Russia and a grudge against Hillary Clinton. It talked about that, and here's what it says. Putin most likely wanted to discredit Secretary Clinton because he has publicly blamed her since 2011 for inciting mass protests against his regime in late 2011 and early 2012, and because he holds a grudge for comments he almost certainly saw as disparaging him. It also talks about how Moscow saw President-elect Trump, now President-elect Trump, at the time candidate Trump, as a way to achieve an international counterterrorism coalition against ISIS, and that after Trump's victory, Russian media hailed President-elect Trump's victory as a vindication of Putin's advocacy of global populist movements, the theme of Putin's annual conference for Western academics in October 2016, and the latest example of Western liberalism's collapse. And we reported, as you recall, Wolf, last night, there were also intercepted communications that's not in this declassified report, where the Russian government officials were apparently celebrating and congratulating one another after Trump won, according to intelligence officials.
They also explain in this declassified report why Putin and other high-ranking Russian officials preferred Trump.
That's right. So it talks about the fact that they believe that Trump would be a better partner against ISIS, more favorable to Moscow. And the report says that there was a coordinated effort through these fake news operations, through RT, formerly Russia Today. It talks about how RT was a propaganda arm of the Russian government to push out negative news about Hillary Clinton and more favorable news about Donald Trump.
The report also warns that Russia can fully be expected to do more of this down the road.
That's right. Well, it talked about sort of this gradual increase in Russian efforts during elections. It talks about how in past years it would steal emails and just gather intelligence, and then it escalated those efforts during this past election. And it says expect more of the same by this information warfare, if you want to call it that we saw during the election. It says Russia will be doing the same through spear phishing campaigns with fake news operations. It says we assess Moscow will apply lessons learned from its campaign aimed at the U.S. presidential election to future influence efforts in the United States and worldwide, including against U.S. allies and their election processes. We assess the Russian intelligence services would have seen their election influence campaign as at least a qualified success because of their perceived ability to impact public discussion. But important to point out here again and reiterate, there's no indication that the Russians were able to tamper with any vote tallies, but it's clear they felt like they had a victory with influencing public perception, perhaps.
That's what their conclusion was. No indication that voting machines were actually tampered with, but they do have all these other conclusions. Pamela Brown, thanks very much. Joining us now is Leon Panetta.